Hi guys, it's me, Mayameen Meftahi. I'm a qualified psychotherapist, NLP practitioner, independent advocate and fitness instructor. So I run my social enterprise, which is combining emotional, mental and physical well-being. But most of you may know me through my trauma, my specialism in trauma, and so I've thought, and I've been asked a lot, requested a lot, to start doing little captures of what is trauma, what is it really about. I mean, trauma as in a word has become a complete buzzword recently, which is great, of course, because it can help people to identify what they're actually going through, what's happening within their behaviours, within their brain. But it has kind of, got a bit confusing, I would say, because when we think of the word trauma, we are thinking big things, right? So naturally, child abuse, domestic violence, or rape. Or for many of us, we're still connected back to the word PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from a traumatic event as being in war veterans. Right? So we've got kind of like a double-edged sword in some sense. We've got that opposite end where it's only big stuff that can create PTSD, the symptoms of a traumatic event, or it's for those in the war. So I wouldn't have PTSD. So I'm coming to cut down the middle and say that every single person has a symptom or has suffered a symptom of PTSD, because there is absolutely no one who is immune to trauma. So trauma, as in a traumatic life event, can be on that scale of domestic violence and abuse for one person, but then on the opposite end of the scale, it could be losing a loved one. That's really traumatic. Bereavement, grief. It could even be losing a pet, something that you hold dearly. Trauma can also happen when you're witnessing something, when life events are happening and you're witnessing it. So if you're witnessing a sudden or violent death of a loved one. So every single person has been through a life event that at the time was traumatic. Now, how the response to that trauma is obviously how it's going to affect you to this present day, or how you are coping presently with the effects of the life events. And very, very often, which I think is really important to remember, is that those big traumas, and I quote them because if you think about me, if you know my backstory, my big trauma was child sexual abuse. And it was a trauma that, a suffering that I've trapped and I'd blocked so deep that actually that wasn't the escalation of my PTSD. It was actually the birth of my first child that escalated my PTSD. So very often what can happen is we think we've dealt with the big traumas, we think we've got over them, we think that we're just doing fine and dandy, and then bang, they hit us like someone has smashed us over the head with a brick, and they literally come back to haunt us because we've never really allowed the healing process that we need for trauma. So I'm not going to go into a whole big spiel about it in one video. There is way too much to get through. What I'm going to do is actually just focus today on avoidance and safety behaviours. So most of you may or may not already know how it works with regards to the amygdala, the alarm, the brain that activates the fight, flight, freeze and fawn response in the brain. And obviously what that's doing is it's kind of, I always put here, I'm always going to touch here whenever I talk about brains, right? That's just what I do. And obviously the cortisol, when this has happened, puts an end to the stress response. Okay, so it's kind of sending a message saying everything's safe here, it's okay. So whatever has happened, now we are safe. But within PTSD, the body's stress hormones do in fact not return to the baseline threat that has now passed. So imagine you had the threat, that's all been activated. The cortisol and the adrenaline, all the chemicals that rush around the body to activate this amygdala to make you respond. And once you're now safe, it's actually not coming back to its baseline. It's not returning back to that, oh, I'm actually okay. It's still staying alert. You're still staying in that activated hyper state. So what happens within PTSD patients, I don't like to use that word because, like I just said, we're all suffering. I have at some point suffered from the effects or the symptom of PTSD, but whatever for now. The stress hormone system actually fouls the balancing act, right? So getting it down, bringing it up, bringing it to baseline, getting it down, bringing it up, bringing it to baseline. And the fight, flight, freeze response is still activated long after the danger has happened, and it can then continue to stay activated. So instead the continued kind of secretion of the stress hormones is expressed as agitation or panic. And then what happens is we activate our behaviors. As human beings, we all have behaviors, and behaviors impact the way that we are, the way we behave, right? So if you had this activation, you then start to activate an avoidance or safety behavior. Now, in my 7-week PTSD recovery program, I go through this in a lot more detail, but I'm just going to whack out a very short vlog video for you on what are avoidance and safety behaviours, because I get asked a lot, well, what are you talking about, Mayameen? Like, what's an avoidance and safety behaviour? So when something happens that makes you feel uncomfortable, then a natural impulse is to just avoid it altogether, right? So if someone's upset you and you know they're going to be at a place, you just want to avoid it altogether, or you want to try to escape from it quickly. So say you're in the place and somebody that you don't dislike, you don't get along with, walks in, you want to escape quickly. So PTSD creates a behaviour change, basically, as you try to avoid the triggers that's creating the environment. Safety behaviours also then form, but these are more like rituals and habits that we intend to reduce distress, that we feel that can calm us down, and those safety behaviours may make you feel better. In the long term, they do not actually make you any safer. They are very short-lived in the sense of creating a form of safety, but long-term, they are not effective. Now, I know myself, and I'm sure you do, that whenever you try to avoid someone, then it's like the law of attraction, you just bump into them everywhere. And what will happen is the longer you try to avoid that, the worse it's going to get when you actually bump into that person, or the thing that you've been trying to avoid, you actually then have to face it, becomes a lot worse than had you have actually done the process work in order to face it. So just an example of avoidance is things like not answering the telephone. I am so guilty of that. Or maybe not wanting to go out, so you're just literally trying to avoid the situation. Now, don't get confused between is it safety or is it avoidance, because if I'm not going to that place, is that because I need to feel safe? Now, safety, for example, would be not disclosing your emotions, feeling that you're trapped, or if you're on hyper arousal, feeling heightened in your state, checking the window, checking the door, making sure it's locked. So always making that safety bubble around you. Now, safety and avoidance behaviours can be quite confusing because they interlink. So like I just said, if you're avoiding going to a place because someone's going to be there, are you doing that as I'm protecting myself because I don't want to have that level of anxiety? So they're very confusing, which is why in my program we discuss them a lot more, and we can then really identify this difference between that safety and the avoidance. But the point is basically here, to cut it a long story short, is that they are both unhealthy in the long term. So they are both unhealthy behaviours that we nurture as we go through our day to day. So my challenge for you would be looking at what are your avoidance and safety behaviours. So maybe looking at trying to notice the situations that you try to avoid, the places that you try to avoid, the things that you're trying to avoid, your activities, your people, etc., and write a list. So have your avoidance list and your safety behaviour list of the things that you intentionally avoid because of your current state of how you feel, and the safety behaviours that you use to protect yourself. So what is a safety behaviour? What are you doing that you feel is protecting yourself or to control your level of distress? So that would be the first thing that I would suggest that you do if you're really interested on, you know, your avoidance and your safety behaviours and trying to cap down on living a better, more meaningful life where you're not avoiding the things that you used to do, and then working through that step by step to unpin, are they actually working? Are they actually making a difference to you? So I hope that helps you understand a little bit about avoidance and safety behaviours and trying to understand how they are created very often because you're still stuck in that threatened state, and so the avoidance and the safety will try to make you feel that you have a sense of control back over your current situation. There's your challenge. List your avoidance, list your safety behaviours, start to work out what's really going on, and then you can start to move forward in order to try to conquer those fears of actually, are they going to be working? And you are welcome to pop your comments here on the YouTube channel, and I will respond to you at my very best. It may not be on the time that you've written, but otherwise you are more than welcome to get in touch with me, info@mayameenmeftahi.com. Drop me a line if you need to. I am making these videos so that you can try to understand PTSD, psychological trauma, and most importantly how you can heal so that you can have a meaningful life, because absolutely it is no less than you deserve. So thank you for watching today, and I'll catch you back on the next part of my trauma series.